Hey guys, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a template draft review, and I've actually taken some very interesting information from Twitter from a user called Surtup, as you can see in the quote here. He's also done this work with his friend FPL Masterpiece, also within the tweet, and they've basically scrubbed Twitter and had a look at all the drafts that people have been posting so far and pretty much come up with the most highly owned players on Twitter. So what I thought would be a fun video idea would be to actually recreate this Twitter template draft based on the sort of outputs of this tweet here, and to recreate that and probably discuss, the pros and cons of the draft and what I don't like or do like about it. So that's going to be the tweet. Do give Top a follow. He makes fantastic content for FPL for all users that would be interested in sort of learning a bit more about analytics as well. But let's get on towards the draft. So the draft itself is actually going to feature some pretty interesting options. I think Pickford at 4.5 is reasonable, but I don't think he's the best 4.5 option for now. Pickford was actually featured on a lot of people's drafts early doors, but I don't think people actually prefer him as the best 4.5 option. I think he's just seen as a placeholder. I think even Leno, for example, is better, slightly better defense, also more saves last season, so more avenues to points. Sean Dyche, of course, you're going to get a full preseason with him, but I don't think Everton's defense dramatically changed since he joined. But of course, you can say that a preseason makes all the difference in the world and that he could conceivably improve the defense. And Branthwaite, coming from PSV, is going to come back into the team. Maybe he could also elevate the level of the general defense, but I'm a little bit hesitant on that. I just simply think that Flecken is a much better option from Brentford. We do expect him to start as the number one keeper for Brentford no matter what. And at the same time, I do think that at 4.5, one of the hidden gem options that no one has really discussed so far is Sam Johnstone from Crystal Palace. You're looking at someone who's actually played for the defensive makeup of a team that have ended up top 5 in expected goals conceded in the last 2 seasons. So I do think Sam Johnstone's even a better option than Pickford for now. As far as the defense, so Trent Alexander-Arnold's probably the most controversial player here. I do think that Trent finds his way into my draft at this point in time. The reason being is because if you're dropping Salah, I do think you can accommodate for Trent in your team. As you can see, this team still looks incredibly well-rounded. I mean, it already, for the time being, of course, has a very, very strong defense. Trent's probably going to have his close to best season possible. Now, Liverpool have been an incredible defense in years past, a top 2, top 3 defense, and last season was a huge step off from that. So their final XGC numbers put them around 7th or 8th in the league, which is of course a huge drop off from previous years. But I've got to say that I expect Liverpool to improve. We also saw that when they slightly moved their formation to be a hybrid of, let's say, that sort of 3-back formation where Trent's in the midfield, and then that 4-back formation when they're off the ball, that actually saw Liverpool get a lot more clean sheets. Their defensive underlying numbers had also slightly improved. So I do think that Liverpool are, we can expect them to do at least better than last season. And Trent in the midfield was so lucrative in terms of the attacking returns that he got close to the end of the season. And these stats were also backing that up. I just think that he's definitely worth 8.0, but he's not essential for this time being. As far as Shaw, I also think that the interesting thing with him is that given that you actually have Pickford in this draft template, you could probably move Shaw towards Onana, who I would expect to be released in the game at 5.0 if he actually gets signed by United, or any other United keeper joining, I think would be a 5.0 option. So you could probably look in towards a player like that. And that would probably save you 0.5 off of Shaw. But of course, that's going to be the same price when you look at Pickford and Shaw added up. But what that does give you is the option to look and seek for another 5.0 defender. And I do think that Gabriel is the big missing option here in this template draft. If you can go for Onana and Gabriel, I much prefer that compared to, let's say, Pickford plus Shaw, or any 4.5 plus Shaw for the time being. Why is Shaw someone that I'm not particularly high on? It's not even that. It's actually because I just think Gabriel is an exquisite option at 5.0. And I think Shaw is actually very comparable to Estupinian, who you can clearly see is priced at 5.0. So why spend that additional 0.5 when there are options in the game that can kind of deliver what Shaw can for cheaper? So Estupinian, I clearly believe, is that option. Brighton simply have electric starting fixtures. He's one of the most attacking defenders, one of the most nailed defenders, and he's not comparable, for example, to either his keeper, unless, let's say, Jason Steele makes a save, or a penalty save, sorry, that is, or even Dunk, for example, who we know is a great player in the air, but just simply hasn't racked up any good statistics in terms of headers, or even just simply the expected goals per 90, which would reflect how many chances he gets in set pieces. If we move on to the midfield now, we actually have Enciso here. He's the option that I have the most issues with in any player's draft so far, because I do think that Enciso, despite being such an electric option in terms of his underlying stats, so really high expected goals per 90, really high expected assists per 90 as well, I just think that he's going to lack minutes this season. I mean, you have to look at the depth of Brighton. I'll start listing them off. You've got Undav, you have Ferguson, you have João Pedro, Mitoma, March, Sarmiento, Buonanotte, Lallana. These are all players who could feature in the team. I think I probably might have missed a name or two out as well. Maybe Moder, who could actually join and help this attack out. So I do think Enciso is really going to lack minutes because there's going to be so much rotation there. He specifically plays more so in the 10 position. So you'll see a lot of the match reports will suggest that Enciso plays in that 10 spot. But we also saw that De Zerbi was very happy to play sort of hybrid forwards in that 10 position. We saw Undav play there. I do think João Pedro can easily play there, even though he could cover sort of left wingish type positions. And that's going to really hamper Enciso's minutes. So I do think that he's a bit of an early trap, unless we see that he's, consistently starting games in the preseason and we have a little bit more faith in him as an option. Maybe we see, let's say, Brighton loan out some players, etc., etc. As far as Rashford, Fernandes, Saka, Mitoma, I don't think I have any sort of qualms there. I think these are all elite options. In fact, I think if you can actually fit this team in and Enciso actually makes sense as an option, I think this is an incredible draft. And so, Rashford, Fernandes, and Saka, these are options that I would easily say are locks for most people's drafts. A lot of people are actually making that sort of 50-50 decision between Rashford and Fernandes. I'm not actually really opposed to going for Rashford or Fernandes. I think it would just really depend on what draft structure I ended up in and whether I needed that additional 0.5 in the bank. Independently, I think they're fantastic options. So if you can actually fit them both in like this draft does, then, more power to you. Saka, I think, is absolutely nailed in my draft, so I don't really have much to say on him. And then Mitoma is actually an interesting one because I do think that you've already got triple Brighton here. Maybe you don't want to start the season with triple Brighton. Their fixtures do get a little bit more soured after game week 3, so why not maybe start with Mbeumo instead? Or you could actually go for Mitoma to start with and then have a plan to move to Mbeumo or let's say Sterling, because this draft actually includes 0.5 in the bank. So that could be one way to go about it as well. Mitoma, as I said, he's an exquisite option. I do think that actually the Brighton peers in terms of the midfield, like March and Gross, are perfectly fine. Gross will have penalties, so his numbers will actually improve as the season goes on. And March, we're going to see a full season of him playing in that sort of right wing position. So one of the thing about March is that his stats were slightly skewed by the fact that he played right wing back for a few games at the start of the season. So arguably March actually has better numbers than Mitoma if you took that out of the sample size. So, there's a lot of options for Mitoma, but I would certainly not call him a bad one. I think he's still very, very template. I right now actually prefer Mbeumo, just to let you guys know. And now finally with the forwards, Jesus and Haaland are fantastic options. I think this is the most template structure in terms of going for a 3-5-2. It's no surprise. I think it just has the most amount of flexibility. It allows you to pivot between some of the best options in the forwards without trying to sort of sacrifice in a 3-4-3. I think the midfielders are really poor in the 4.5 positions, whereas with the forwards, I don't think you care too much, and potentially we could have some hidden gems like Balogun moving to a Premier League team, etc., etc. People have talked about that. But yeah, Jesus, I think, is someone that I'm a little bit more certain of over, let's say, Nkunku. I do think Nkunku will actually be on penalties, so that's a huge advantage that he has compared to a Jesus. But Jesus, we know, is a very creative player. His expected goal numbers, despite not being a penalty taker, are still very, very high. Some of the best in the league, even though he's a negative finisher. And when I mean negative finisher, it means that he's historically one of the worst finishers we've seen in football. And that's not actually me sort of creating a lie, but that is something that we've seen in terms of people who've actually projected how well you do compared to your expected goals and how much you underperform it. Jesus really is one of the worst finishers in football. But I still think because he actually does so many things right and he still bore out a lot of FPL points last season, Jesus is certainly by no means a bad option, and he still features in my current drafts. And Haaland, of course, I think the less we say about him, the better. He was the most template option. That's no shock to us. And yeah, I think he's going to be a perma captaincy option. And given the fact that Salah didn't find his way to this draft, it's very clear why you have to go for the Norwegian Viking here. In terms of the bench, if we move on there and sort of round out the video, Areola, Bell, Bayer, and Archer. This is a very, very weak bench, but however, this draft does have 0.5 in the bank, and you could easily move, let's say, Bell or Bayer into Botman. I think Bell actually has some better games between game weeks 1 and 8. So if you're planning some sort of early wild card, I'd probably go with Bell. I probably would even go for Baldock as well, who actually has better fixtures than Burnley. I just think Burnley have really, really bad fixtures to start with, so why even bother with them? As far as a 4.5 option to move into, I'm actually a little bit more high on going for a Brentford pick, because let's say you go for the Onana plus Gabriel variation, you don't have access to the Brentford goalkeeper. then you could actually just go for Henry or Pinnock or even, let's say, Hickey as your 4.5 defender. And that would actually probably give you a little bit more of a well-rounded team. It would still give you access to a top 6 defense in the Prem. And for me, I think that's utterly worthwhile. As far as Botman, unfortunately, all his fixtures are terrible until game week 5. Game week 1 is decent versus Aston Villa at home. But of course, I think we all remember that incredible Watkins game where he played well versus Newcastle. I'm not saying that will happen again. That's clearly not how football works. But just still, I mean, Aston Villa, we expect them to be a top 8-ish team. So very, very tough games for Newcastle's to start the season with. So just doesn't seem to make sense to actually go for Botman because he's not really going to help your team out in any sort of way compared to a 4.0 option until game week 5. So why not start the season with someone like Henry in that case? If you really think your team can actually survive till game week 5 without having to use Botman, then fine, go for Botman because he'll probably end up being a better pick and probably the best pick in the 4.5 defenders until the end of the season. But yeah, I think that's my thoughts on the bench. And Areola, of course, I can understand why people are going for him. A very high chance that you could get access to, once again, another 4.0 starting keeper that probably is not going to be as huge of a trap as someone like Ward last season, who played for a very, very poor and lackluster Leicester defense. And with the forward position, I mean, Archer, we're not expecting much from the 4.5 forwards unless Balogun moves. As I said, maybe some other options will show up during the season, but for now, I mean, no issues about that. And that's actually my general thoughts of the draft. If I had to give this draft rating out of 10, I'd probably say 7.5. I think there's some things to work on in the draft. Definitely whether Enciso's nailed or not, because I wouldn't want to rely on him for every single game, particularly when my bench is weak. And then also, I'm not a particular fan of Pickford for now, and I think that can be improved on. And that's pretty much it. I think this draft is actually very, very good. Maybe I'm being a bit too harsh as well, but I do think, most of Twitter have it right in terms of the template. And yeah, let me know your thoughts on the template draft. Do you think that 352 is the best structure, or what would you change about this draft? Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.